Hello and welcome everyone to our first virtual Agile Boston meetup for 2025, and we're kicking it off with a very special guest, Will Seele. Here he is. So Will is a professional Scrum trainer, a professional Kanban trainer. He's an author. He is also runs his own consulting firm called ProSilience, and he is also part of the evidence-based management company that was founded by Ryan Ripley and Todd Miller. So he comes to us with very high credentials. And if anyone can talk to us about evidence-based management and how to actually use it in a practical way, Will is the guy.
Right, so this is three things I learned about evidence-based management, and with apologies to our wonderful data science crowd, I'm not going to be talking about metrics all that much here. They'll come by, but one of the things we learned is that the onus is slightly different to get it to really work for you and get it to really work for your client. So, quick overview on what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to give you a brief introduction of myself, at least beyond what Joe already shared. A very quick primer on EBM. We only have a limited amount of time. I can't cover the whole thing, and frankly, there are better classes and better books for that. Then three lessons: where to start, how to continue. Honestly, talking about getting back to basics, this is really what myself, Ryan, and Todd have really found to be things you want to get right. Because if you get them wrong, it never really takes off, and you get stuck in unpleasant spaces. We'll do a big QA, and then we'll wrap up, and that'll be the end of our wonderful time together, my dear American and potentially other friends, depending on where you are in the world right now. So, as Joe already shared, my name is Will, or Wilbert, as my parents named me, which is a proud Dutch name with a proud heritage. It means strength of will. I am the director of ProSilience, which is a company I started 6 years ago now, and I am also, together with Todd and Ryan, the co-founder of the evidence-based company. Which is, one is my personal consulting business, and the other one is kind of the vehicle that we're going to try to use to make evidence-based management really take off in the world. I'm also a husband to my wife, Mara. I wanted to put professional husband here, but she wouldn't let me. That said, I am really good at being a husband, so I think I will, in fact, change it to professional husband. I'm also a lover of cats. Currently in Geneva, they're not here, but were we recording this from my house, they would probably show up in screen multiple times. So, before we go into the case, before we go into the lessons learned, a very quick EBM primer. What is this thing that we're talking about? So, EBM consists of three parts: goals, measures, and empiricism. The most important part of it and the most overlooked part of it really are the goals. EBM takes a company's strategy, kind of their ambition, and says formulate a strategic goal around that. That can be at the company level, that can be at a departmental level, at a product level, at a team level, even at an individual level, which is something that we're experimenting with this year. It says what is the important thing that you're trying to get to, right? Something big, something very far away, but some sort of North Star that you're trying to get to. Because it's very big, because it's very far away, it helps us to get focus. but it doesn't really allow us to plan or measure in any meaningful way. So we want to slice that up. So we want to find an intermediate goal. Now, the intermediate goal is somewhere where we want to be in the midterm. So depending on the kind of industry that you're in, that could be 3 months in the future, 6 months in the future, maybe even a year in the future. Anything beyond that, I would say we're veering very far into long term. But the intermediate goal has two purposes, right? One is it gives us a much closer horizon to start planning against. But the other thing it allows us to do is validate our strategic goal, right? We don't know if our strategic goal is the right thing to aim for. So our intermediate goal is as much a step towards realizing that strategic goal as it is a means to get information on, well, does it make sense to pursue? Because it's midterm, it's still too far in the future. It's still too broad to really actively tell us what we should be doing today. So that is where the third level of goal comes in, the immediate tactical goal. So this is really near term. This is where I want to be next month, next sprint, next week. That tells me once again, am I on the right path towards realizing my intermediate goal? But also, does the intermediate goal make sense? Right? Is it the right thing to pursue? And so it's not just about breaking down very big strategic goals that we're trying to achieve. No, we are validating as we go. We look at these things with a certain amount of suspicion, as we always should when trying to plan towards the future. When I have these things, I know where I'm heading in the near term. I know how that contributes to the midterm, and I know how that is potentially going to help me reach where I want to be on the long term. But it's also preventing me from going down the wrong lane. Once I know that, I can start figuring out, well, what do I need to measure, right? What is the evidence that I need to collect related to these goals, right? And this is where evidence-based management identifies four key value areas, two much more market-facing, right? Kind of external to the organization, two much more inward-facing. Unrealized value, right? What are the things that we're trying to capitalize on or the markets that we're trying to reach that we're not yet today? This is mostly going to be the measure attached to your strategic goal and probably your intermediate goal as well, right? It is what is the measure of the thing that we don't have yet or don't have enough of yet today that we're trying to get to. Current value are the measures that tell me about the value that is being delivered today. So where unrealized value are measures that tell me something about where I'm heading, current value are measures that tell me something about where I am right now. Right? That gives you a view of where your organization is and where your organization is headed. The bottom two ones, ability to innovate and time to market, are actually measures that tell me if I'm capable and to what extent I'm capable of influencing the above key value areas. All right, so ability to innovate are that key value area contains measures that tell me something about my ability to change, right? If I see an opportunity, can I capitalize on that? Do I have enough changeability left after I do all of my maintenance and all of my defect fixing? Are my people capable of changing? Do I have a flexible workforce? Or does any change in product direction immediately mean that I need to start hiring new people and letting go of certain others, right? In other words, if I want to change unrealized value or change current value, measures and ability to innovate tell me if I'm capable of doing that and to what extent. Time to market, finally, kind of the word kind of says it all, is sure, I can change, but how fast? Right. What are the measures that tell me something about my reaction speed? The goal is not to have an exhaustive list. The goal of this, and also the reason why it was visualized in this way, is to remind you that you need to have a holistic view of measures that allow you to control your organization, that tell you, am I still heading in the right way? Does that not come at the cost of where I am today? Am I not doing damage to myself? Am I capable of change? And am I capable of doing that fast enough? Right. And that total allows me to control my journey towards realizing these goals. And that's where EBM comes together, right? My goals tell me where I'm headed. My measures are telling me if I'm still going in the right direction, if I'm still capable of going there, where my weaknesses are, where my strengths are. And that in turn allows me that empiricism, right? The ability to take actions based on my ability or inability to achieve those goals, right? And the thing that I would argue EBM does a little bit different is that we're not just mindlessly focused on achieving our goals, we're actually actively looking for evidence to disprove their validity, even as we strive to deliver them. So for those of you that are in a Scrum context, one way you would approach this is in your daily Scrum, right? Start of the day, you have a team conversation, right? Are we still on the way to realizing our sprint goal? Right? And how are we going to collaborate today to take one step closer to our sprint goal? EBM would add another question to that, which is, does the sprint goal still make sense? And how do we know? Right? How do we avoid wasting time? And what should we be doing instead? So, a very, very quick primer on EBM. And keep all of that in mind as we head into our case. So, first thing I learned, there is a lot you can measure, but there's not a lot worth measuring. So let me set the scene here. This is a story of one of the many times that me, Todd, and Ryan worked together to try to help make the world a little bit better. Our client in this case was a very large but budget-focused company. Right? It wasn't about making the most luxury product, wasn't about conquering the market. No, they had a niche in mind. Their challenge um, was, well, kind of the usual suspects almost. Lack of alignment in the organization, planning takes way too long, and for some reason, things seem very hard to get done. What they already had in place is they had good use of Scrum at the team level, they had well-educated personnel, and they had initial use of EBM. So they had kind of started on that journey. They'd taken some classes, they'd read some of the material, but they were still struggling. So what was happening over there? Um, well, when we asked for the tour, they started with the dashboard. And the dashboard that they showed us had kind of an effect on us, which is comparable to the effect this screenshot of my old gaming days is going to have on you. As you can see here, it is totally clear what I am doing, and there are many measures in place. Of course, the problem with all of this is you can see a lot of measures in place. You can see a lot of percentages here. You can see numbers here and numbers here and numbers here and numbers here and also some numbers here. Um, but you have no idea what I'm trying to accomplish here. Well, maybe one of you if you have a history in World of Warcraft. What we found was the dashboard kind of contained everything. There were value measures in place at the executive level. but they were only measured very infrequently, um, only a few times a year. There were cost measures in place at the portfolio level. They were very aware of what they were spending, but because of the way budgets work, the portfolio group focused on maximizing the amount of work in progress because we had to make sure that we got maximum bang for our buck. There were flow measures in place at the team level, which of course makes us very, very happy. So the teams got a lot done, but they often had to rework things because even though they finished it fast and it was well created qualitatively, um, it kind of missed the mark on what the customer really needed. So there was often a revisiting of things. For the operational teams, the teams that were meant to kind of keep the product up and running once it had been delivered, they had stability measures in place. Um, but because they were only measured on stability, they really focused on firefighting, right? Keep the thing up as much as possible. And there really was no time to go back to development to talk about these things because they were measured on different things. So what happened was that they started with measures first. Each level had defined their own measures, right? And as usual, they defined things that they knew, number one, and that they felt they could influence, number two. Um, they were very, very inspired by the conversations that they were having most frequently, right? That other people asked them for. Um, and what they've also found is that they didn't communicate about those measures because very simple, they were very localized. So if the teams could have wonderful conversations on flow metrics and probabilistic forecasting, but the portfolio level didn't talk about that. They talked about cost. And the teams, they didn't talk about cost because they didn't know cost. It was just not a factor in their conversations. Um, Part of the reason that happened is that there was such a delay between kind of setting where you wanted to go with a product at the executive level to the point where work actually arrived at the team, that that context was completely lost by the time development would start. So the teams were working on items that were budgeted, that were planned at one point, but they had no idea of the context in which those items appeared or even the broader initiative they were a part of. So what we learned is noise. It's essentially Chinese whispers that were taking place here. The executive level had a strategy. They formulated goals based on that strategy. But then those goals at the portfolio level were turned into programs. And those programs then turned into requirements. And this resulted in a disconnect because it wasn't the goal that was communicated, it was the resulting work towards that goal that was communicated. Probably more relevant to this talk, and something I want you all to keep in mind, is when people there started using EBM, they started with the KVAs. They started with the measures, right? What do we measure today? What do we know? And let's put that in there. And it can give you some insight, but the problem is to what end? Right. So the lesson that I want you to take away from all of this, from this chaos and miscommunication that happened here, is if you don't know where you're going, measures only really serve to distract you. At the very best, they are noise, but more likely than that, they are going to optimize the wrong things. And in the case of these teams, of course, they didn't even have that holistic view, right? If you remember the development teams, for example, focus really hard on flow metrics, which are very much in the time to market range. Um, so you could get faster and faster to market, but they had no idea, well, what is the value that we're trying to capitalize on and what is our ability to innovate? Actually, ability to innovate was very, very low because operationally there was a lot of firefighting going on, but they weren't measuring that at the team level. Arguably, had they started to define their own value measures as well, this would have been even more of a problem because now you have teams trying to capitalize on a completely different kind of value than the executives might intend for the company to try to capitalize on. So that is lesson number one, right? Figure out your goals first. And if you know where you're going, find the minimum set of measurements that you need to look at to see if you're actually getting there and how you're going to get there. So now that we know what not to do,
Will, one question there.
go ahead.
So when you talk
Yeah.
about minimum set of measurements that to tell you whether you're on the track of getting there, but you also mentioned something earlier. Should those measurements also indicate whether that goal is still relevant?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely.
thank you.
Right. So if your strategic goal, for example, is, hey, we want to capitalize on a certain subset of the market, um, right? Let's say 40-year-old Bostonians, um, right? That is the unrealized value measure that I want to track, right? If I'm delivering, do I see an uptick there? And if I'm delivering great things of high quality, but I'm not seeing that market increase, then well, maybe that's not the goal I should be chasing. Maybe that market is somewhere else. So now that we know where to start at the goals, not the measures, let's talk about how to start. And this is really where I had to learn some business basics. And if I do this part well, that should save you at least a year in an MBA. So now that I've way overpromised what I'm going to do, um, what did we do next at our client, right? So we figured out this disconnect, right? We needed goals. So the next step was getting good goals in place. We decided to go for a very, very basic approach. There are many ways to get goals in place at EBM. In EBM, you can do strategic, intermediate, and tactical goals all at the team level. Um, you can do them at the product level. What we did here was strategic goals at the executive level, creating and tracking intermediate goals at the portfolio level, and then making sure that the sprint goals for the teams, because these were good functioning Scrum teams, were good immediate tactical goals. Our idea was that once this was in place, we could then revisit the KVAs and find a holistic set of measures that everyone could use so that we all spoke the same language and we all looked at the same things. So let's figure out our strategic goals. Strategic goals are derived from the company strategy or the product strategy. This, we were told the company had a strategy in place. We found out not a lot of companies do, because once we started actually digging through all of this, lots of beautiful words. Clearly, some consultants have been highly paid to craft this. But we really found that the strategy just consisted of three things: increase market share, increase profit, increase customer referrals. That is not a strategy, ladies and gentlemen. That is just a result. So, what then is a strategy? I'm going to try to cover the absolute basics on this. And if Henry Mintzberg, Roger Martin, or Michael Porter happen to be in the chat, please don't find and kill me, because I am dramatically oversimplifying some things. There are very broadly two ways to approach strategy. One is a costing strategy. A costing strategy is fairly simple, is you are trying to look at two variables: the relative cost of the thing that you're trying to produce and the relative quality that you're delivering to the market for that cost. And this comes from Michael Porter's work. His argument there is what you're trying to reach is kind of that ideal point of I have the lowest possible costs for the quality that I'm delivering, right, through some sort of operational excellence or those sorts of things, where it's not possible to deliver a higher quality at that cost, right? This is what's called the productivity frontier. This is where you're at your most efficient and effective. And other parties, other competitors may find a different space where they want to be, right? They might say, okay, I'm delivering a slightly better quality for the item, but it's going to come at a slightly higher cost. This examples of this are YKK, right? The company that makes zippers. They make good zippers. That's all they do. The toilet paper industry. Um,
Mhm.
and it's not a very fun place to be in as an organization because you have to be so very, very optimized that your profit margins are very low, right? Take a toilet paper producing company, for example. They might make a cent on a pack in terms of profit. And it leaves you wide open for disruption because at some point, someone is going to figure something out, could be automation or some sort of new way of working or whatever, that's going to move that productivity frontier. And suddenly, someone is capable of delivering the same quality that you do, except at a lower cost. So while some companies really thrive there, if you are in the knowledge industry, which I would say most of you are, this is not a good long-term strategy for your organization or your product. And let me be even more blunt, you will lose to China.
Mm.
And before you lost to China, you lost to Japan because they're really, really good at this. Fortunately, there is a other way to approach strategy, and this is approaching it based on differentiation. So a differentiating strategy means that instead of a take all approach, you are going to target a specific niche. You are going to figure out a specific customer that you are going to optimize for. That doesn't mean you refuse other clientele. It just means it's not going to be the perfect product for them, right? You're going to say, I'm going to make these people happier at the cost of making these people a little bit sadder. You're going to make very considered trade-offs, right? So you're going to make certain choices on what you are going to do, what you're not going to do, right? We can make it fast and cheap, but not good. Um, but the way you're going to do that is you're going to look for fit. So you're going to find trade-offs that make the product better for your target niche. So that all sounds very theoretical. So let me give you an example of one of my favorite places in Utrecht, in the Netherlands. And by the way, again, if you really want to dive into this, there are much better sources, and I would highly recommend you look into some of these, because your Scrum knowledge, your Agile knowledge isn't going to make the kind of difference that understanding organizational strategy is going to make for you. But let's talk about strategy in action. Let's talk about what a differentiation strategy actually looks like. One of my favorite places in the Netherlands is a place called the Malt Vault. I know. It's it's beautiful. And let
Mm.
me tell you why the Malt Vault is the absolute worst run bar in the Netherlands. It starts with figuring out where it is because they don't really advertise on the street. It is located on the Utrecht canals, and you actually have to walk down to the pier, and the entrance is under a bridge. If you don't know where it is, you're not going to stumble on it. Once you figure out where it is, you would better have a reservation because they only have limited seating, and you're not getting in if there's no seating because they want to make sure that the volume is low so people can talk about whiskey in there. Once you're in, they have about 500 whiskeys there. in three different levels behind the bar. This is a picture of what it looks like behind the bar. And then they also have the eponymous malt vault. They won't sell you whiskeys from the malt vault unless you're a member. The only way to become a member is if the owner likes you. I'm a member. Then, to really make sure they run a terrible, terrible business, their staff are employed full time and they are required to know all of the whiskeys that are there, not just names, but tastes, so they can advise you on how to combine them in different flights of whiskey, right? So the onboarding of staff is a very arduous process. And once you have them, because of Dutch labor laws, it's nigh impossible to get rid of them either. Right? So no day laborers. So all of this combined, impossibility to find, then you also have to get in, very high staffing cost, makes it an incredibly badly run bar by any measure of how bars are supposed to run.
Except,
Except this is the most strategically optimized bar in the Netherlands because they understand their niche. Because what do whiskey snobs really love? A sense of exclusivity, right?
other,
That old speakeasy vibe.
I was going to say other whiskey snobs.
That too. Right. So first there's that sense of exclusivity of, well, I'll take you to a place. You wouldn't have found it without me. Right. There's no random people stumbling on there. It's seeded, right? And they specifically keep the volume of people in there low so you can talk about your whiskey with your friends that you have. They'll even bring the bottles to the table so you can take a picture, right? The staff is there to advise you. So when you tell them, hey, these are some of the flavors that I like, they can recommend things along that line, or they can introduce you to something new that you might like. The fact that you need a reservation to get in makes it even better, right? Because now you walk in, tell them you have a reservation, you have a table with your name on it, right? The trade-offs that they make that make them a bad bar, paradoxically enough, make them so much better for their target audience. This is what strategy does. And therefore, you, on the topic of trying to get their target audience to go anywhere else, you can't do any random thing. You can't put whiskey on offer somewhere else. No, you'd have to replicate the entire vibe even better to get people to switch. But because they're so good at what they do, here I am promoting a bar in the Netherlands to all of you. So, how do we find that strategy? Fortunately, even when the strategy isn't explicitly known, it still exists. If your company has existed for more than a year, it has a strategy. Even more fortunate for our client, our overall strategy was one of differentiation, right? They weren't going for the mass market custom approach. No, while they were a budget brand, they were very, very focused about who they were budgeting for, which means product strategies could follow. What it also meant is that because the strategy had become lost, right? It still existed, but it was just not documented or talked about. Communicating and acting on that strategy, right? Bringing it back to life in a way, bringing it back into the conversation, become a core part of the work of the executives, portfolio group, and product owners, right? They had to talk about it to give that context. So, what is the big lesson in all of this? It's really hard to figure out what to do if you don't know how you plan to win, right? You have to know the strategy before you can start making goals. All right. So now that we have our starting point, now that we have our strategy, how do we continue? So At this point, our client is aligning everyone on the strategy, right? The strategy's been made formal again. They're starting to use goals. They identify measures in unrealized and current value so that they're focused on the company, they're focused on the product, and we establish hygiene measures in the ability to innovate and time to market, right? So one of the things that we want to do was get rid of that firefighting that was happening in operations work and get them much more to a sustainable way of working. A new problem emerged. And that is really where empiricism hits, because not all bets, right? Everything we do is essentially a bet. And once we had our goals, once we had our measures, it turns out that some of the decisions, some of the bets that were made in the past, let me give you some context. As part of earlier cost control, teams were organized for efficiency, right? We wanted to make, because they had a lot of external hires, we wanted to make sure that uh, the back end team was doing back end and the channels team was doing channels and etc. So that organization, right, around systems, essentially system component teams, as some call them, did in fact reduce costs. So it seemed like a successful approach. But it introduced a workflow where teams were very often dependent on other teams, which resulted in a lot of delays and overhead. Where, as we were doing interviews there, one developer estimated that they spent about 25% of their time just managing technical dependencies, right? Not coding, not testing, just talking to other teams. Hygiene measures are what I'd like to call kind of the internally focused ones. So, what are our flow metrics? Um, how much time do we spend building new things versus maintaining what's already there? Um, how many defects do we have once we hit production? How long does it take on average to fix those defects? So really, they don't tell me about value, but they essentially tell me about my organizational hygiene, my ability to deliver that value. So here's where measures become really, really interesting. So we had this case, right? It reduced cost, and we had anecdotal evidence that a lot of time was spent managing delays and overhead. Now, one thing we could have done to kind of validate this 25% time is start tracking people and talking to people and trying to really put a number on, well, okay, how much time are we spending managing technical dependencies? But that's a very complicated question to answer, right? That takes a lot of measurement, that takes a lot of effort. So we did something much simpler, much cheaper, and we asked the teams to create something we called um, a dependency index. So every team ended up producing one of these, and this is a fairly simple graph. But what this essentially shows is if we look at all the features in our backlog, how many have only one dependency? How many have two dependencies? And dependencies here, we really meant not dependencies to other items in the backlog. We meant dependency to another team.
Hmm.
So what this showed is that, well, this team was completely incapable of delivering anything in their backlog by themselves. And for most of them, they had to coordinate with at least three other teams. Now, what this allowed us to do is not have this conversation, right? We didn't have to make the argument anymore of, hey, you spend this much time managing dependencies, because this much simpler measure showed there are too many, right? We can logically deduce from this that we're wasting a lot of time in this coordination because we have to coordinate with so many people. So not all bits work out, right? And this is really the empiricism part of EBM is we have a goal that we're trying to reach. We have some idea of cost reduction or some sort of idea of value realization. Remember that it's a bet. and remember that not all bets work out. So don't just look at the value measures, but also look at those hygiene measures, time to market, ability to innovate. How is this impacting those things? Sure, we've reduced costs, but we've raised time to market. We've lowered our ability to innovate. So this really showed kind of that the shift you get into from a traditional way of working where we create a strategy, we assume that that strategy is correct. We then invest considerable time to craft high quality plans. Again, we can all joke about PMI, but I've met my fair share of project managers. Most of them are good people, smart people, trying their best. Um, they do make high quality plans, but the assumption is that the strategy is correct. The assumption is that the assumptions we make about the future are largely going to be correct. So we assume that the plan we make is correct because we spent considerable time and effort crafting it. And then the kind of dashboard that forms in an organization that measures just gathers on your ability to deliver that plan, right? Are we hitting the milestones in time? Do we still have enough remaining budget left? Do we still have the right people assigned to this? What EBM does is we start from the same point, right? You need to have a strategy before you start using EBM, right? At whatever level you do it. If you do it on organizational level, you need organizational strategy. If you do it at product level, you need a product strategy. But that's our starting point. We assume the strategy is flawed in some way, right? The niche might be wrong. We may have made some wrong assumptions about the trade-offs. We may have misjudged kind of how those trade-offs influence the fit for that particular niche, but there is a flaw in it. We just don't know where, because if we knew where, we would have already fixed it. So we try to spend as little time possible to craft our three levels of goals, right? This is our strategy. What's the strategic goal? What's the intermediate goal? What's the immediate tactical goal? And that immediate tactical goal is the one we start acting on. But even there, we assume that they're going to be flawed in some way. So we also gather evidence. So we gather evidence that tells us something about our strategy. We also gather evidence that tells us something about our goals and our ability to deliver those goals. So, in other words, a certain degree of cynicism. So, some of the side effects that that had is it took people out of this mindset that, hey, I'm playing chess, right? What do I mean by chess? Chess is a game of perfect information, right? If you lose at chess, you've made a mistake somewhere. It's because you know everything your opponent knows, and the rules are also known, right? If you lose at chess, you made a mistake in chess. What this thinking did with our client is they stopped using this analogy and they start to realize, but we're not doing that. We're playing a game of imperfect information, right? It's not chess, it's poker. I don't know what hand my opponent has. And even if they would tell me, they could still be bluffing, right? And sometimes I make the right bet for the right reasons, and I still end up losing because of some sort of fluke. So, um, three lessons. So what I didn't want to give you is, hey, go measure these things, because honestly, what you measure is incredibly situationally dependent. And really you shouldn't be starting at the measures at all. Right? If you're at a client that already has some sort of dashboard, um, treat it like you would a live grenade. What you want to do is figure out what is the strategy that we're trying to realize here. What are the goals we can derive from that? What measures do I need to put in place that tells me something about how I'm progressing towards those goals, if I'm capable of progressing towards those goals, and if they're the right goals to progress towards? And then act on that information and adjust as you go, right? Don't assume anything is correct. figure out where they're wrong, because they're wrong in some way, and then you progress. And let me tell you, if you come at it from that angle, finding what to measure isn't that challenging, right? That focus makes it so that what you should be looking at becomes glaringly apparent. Anyway, questions?
Change the view here. All right, guys. Yep. Let's open it up to some questions. No one has a question? Come on, I'm sure you guys have some questions.
I don't know if I'm that good or if I just lost them.
No, you were fantastic. Um, I guess I'll kick off a question. A lot of us are coming in this community where we're not at the high level strategic uh, part of the organization. We're coming in as scrum masters, or we're coming in as change agents in some way. So, do you have a suggestion how we could come in and maybe try to articulate some of these concepts that you've presented here in our companies? Given that, like I said, we could be a VP, but we're not. So a lot of the
That's
time,
true. That's true.
yeah.
And it's a good question. So I think I think the first thing you want to do, the first thing you want to find out is, what is this company really trying to accomplish? Right. And I would say, if you, depending on the level that you start with, right? Let's say you start with a team working on a product. That product is going to have a strategy, right? There are some base assumptions that cause that product to come into being and have resulted in there continuing to be work done on it. So it's always there, but it's often not documented somewhere. People have forgotten it, or maybe it was never even articulated. It's just something they stumbled across. But find it, and if you're the one that articulates it, right? If you're the one that then has that conversation at a retrospective or at a project meeting or whatsoever, where you can say, "Hey, I've looked at this, and as I understand it, we're trying to accomplish something for these people. These are the choices that we've made that make it successful for these people." Then that allows you to then point at some things you probably have noticed, maybe in the scope that they're trying to realize or how they're trying to realize it, where you say, well, this doesn't seem to fit. And the effect of that isn't just that you give good advice to your clients, but more importantly than that is, you've now given voice to something that they understood but couldn't articulate.
Mhm.
And that makes it so that they experience you as someone that really understands their product. So it gives you trust. And trust is the number one currency in the work that we do. So this step is absolutely the one I would say start with, right? If it's with a team, talk about product. If it's with a portfolio group, talk about their product portfolio. If you are talking to a founder, even at a small company, is help them articulate this, because 99 times out of 100, they will have forgotten this or never wrote it down at all, but it exists. So make it real.
And also, I think it's a great question to ask during your interview process too. If you're trying to select a company, if a company can't answer these questions, you should seriously question whether you want to work there, I would think. Other questions?
I'm seeing one from Julie. If in a government agency where delivering value while being good stewards of taxpayers' money is what's key, is there any way you'd note that EBM be adapted. Um, Adopted, yes. Adapted, no. Um, and so one of my clients in the past here in the Netherlands has been the uh, unemployment wage department, the Department of Social Services, and they do a lot more than that. But it's literally a part of the government whose main mission is to give money away. Um, and so when we're talking about unrealized value there, we're not talking about money, right? We're talking about a societal good that we're trying to accomplish. Um, so we'd absolutely still look at costs. We'd still look at kind of current value measures on how much are we spending. But how we define success isn't market share because, well, in effect, we kind of want less market share. So we want programs that result in less people needing social services. Um, we we would also look, for example, at the duration of an engagement, right? So if someone needs to go on unemployment benefits, for example, how long does it take for them to get back on their own feet, right? So we can look at that, how that is today, but we can also look at it from an unrealized value perspective on, well, what is preventing them from getting back on their feet sooner, right? Is giving them a living wage enough, or do we also want some sort of vocational training being offered, and do we have partners for that? So what value is, how you define value, both in the current value space and the unrealized value space, and the kinds of goals that you're trying to reach are going to be different. But EBM is still EBM. You should still look at your strategic goals, your intermediate goals, your immediate tactical goals. You still should have an idea of what is the unrealized value that we're trying to generate here? What is the current value that I'm delivering now? What is influencing my ability to innovate? What is influencing my time to market? It's just not for profit. Does that answer your question, Julie?
Yeah, yeah, that's really great. Thank you. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
So go
Yeah,
ahead.
please. I was going to say we're running up to the top of the hour, so do you want to conclude here,
So
Will?
so mindful of the time, and I already gave one away, but three things that I hope you take from all of this is, don't start with measures, start with goals, right? If you find, and even if you have defined goals, if you find that identifying what to measure is hard, go back to the goals, right? The more focused you are, the measures are going to almost present themselves. Remember that each goal has two functions. It is a stepping stone towards the next level of that goal, but it also serves as a test on the validity of that next level goal. Strategy we talked about. It's always there. Find it, define it. And as a last one, if you do find that the company is using a costing strategy, again, you don't want to be there. Try to find evidence that helps shift that strategy, right? Make that case. And always, always, always remember to validate your assumptions. Some of your goals are going to be valuable, some of them not. Don't just blindly try to achieve them. Your strategy even might not work. Don't just use the evidence to track progress. Use it to challenge. And there we go. That is three things
Fantastic.
about EBM.
Fantastic. Thank you
Yeah.
very, very much, Will. Very, very much for a great presentation.
Mhm.
This podcast will be available on our YouTube channel within the next couple of days, so you can refer to it as many times as you need to. Will, how do we, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, you can mail me directly at wjsele@prosilience.consulting, or just reach me through the website, prosilience.consulting. I'm also on LinkedIn. I don't post that much, but I do read it if you reach out to me. If it's something specific to evidence-based management, then I would say also check out what we're doing at the Evidence-Based Company. Todd, Ryan, and I frequently blog. We have some free tools available there, and also some interesting new courses that we've developed, including a half-a-day course on using EBM for career management, which could be interesting. I don't know. But yeah, reach out through any of those channels.
Fantastic. So again, thank you very, very much. This was a great presentation, and we'll look forward to our next presentation with Al Shalloway on the 4th Wednesday of February. That'll be our next virtual event. And just a reminder that we're also having, if you signed up already for it, Dan Mesnick is doing weekly workshops on open space technology, teaching people how to do open space in their own companies. And that's every Monday at noon for the next, all the way to the end of March, this cycle here. So again, thank you all for joining, and we will see you next time. In the meantime, stay safe.
Thank you, Will. Terrific job. Loved it.